Yeah, let's bring you all. Welcome you back to our second session of the day. Those of you missed our earlier session, The World's War, Forgotten Soldiers of Empire, David Olusoga in conversation with Yasmin Khan, and all our other sessions featuring P. Quire, Howard Jacobson, Margaret Atwood, Ilan Pamuk, Devdutt Patnaik, Marcus Mensch, Andrew Sean Guerra, and so many others. You can catch these on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, or on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. We are proud and delighted to share with you that we've exceeded over 2.5 million views for this platform. And none of this would have been possible without the interest and enthusiasm of all of you, our viewers. As we lead into the 100th episode next week, we would love to hear from you as to how GLF Brave New World has impacted your view of the world. You can please post your videos to us directly on our email ID, contact@teamworkarts.com, or via WhatsApp on +91 989 11 55107. Our official radio partner is Red FM, Bajate Raho. Our next session is Anita Nair, writer's Coupe. In conversation with the multifaceted best-selling author Ashok Ferrey, she takes us through the inspirations and teachings of her creative journey, spanning from the anchor of her Malayali roots to the range of her prolific literary repertoire, from fiction and poetry to children's books and travel writing, to the fundamental nature of writers and all those who strive to tell a good story. Anita Nair is the author of the novels The Better Man, Ladies Coupé, Mistress, Lessons in Forgetting, Idris, Keeper of the Light, Alphabet Soup for Lover, and Eating Wasps. Nair's other books include a collection of poems titled Malabar Mind, a collection of essays titled Good Night and God Bless, and 6 books for children. Nair has written 2 plays and the screenplay for the movie adaptation of her novel Lessons in Forgetting, which was part of the Indian Panorama at the International Film Festival of India in 2012. And she won the National Film Award in 2013. She's also the founder of the creative writing mentorship program, Anita's Attic. Best-selling Sri Lankan author Ashok Ferrey has 5 books to his credit, 3 novels and 2 short story collections. His latest, The Unmarriageable Man, will be out in early 2021. In a parallel life, he is also a designer and builder of the most beautiful homes in Sri Lanka and elsewhere, and of course, most recently was nominated for a Geoffrey Barber Award. He's also a personal trainer. Please do remember to comment and ask questions by typing it in the comment section below. And in case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. And of course, if we drop off, hang in there. One of us will hang around to keep you informed. Ladies and gentlemen, Anita Nair, Writer's Coupe, in conversation with Ashok Ferrey. Over to you both.
Well, a very good morning, afternoon, or evening to you, wherever you are. I'm here with one of India's best-loved and best-selling authors, Anita Nair. Good evening, Anita.
Good evening, Ashok. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, and you in these kind of strange circumstances. Before we start on your books, I'm just going to ask you, how has all this been for you? You are such a great traveler normally. Has it been easy to sit tight?
Actually, I've just been kind of filling my day with so many things so that I don't think too much about being housebound like this. So, when I'm in Bangalore or wherever I am, then I stay put. So basically what I'm missing out on is, traveling to other places. And yes, I do get cabin fever at times, but yeah, there's nothing to do about it.
So you're coping. You haven't started talking to yourself or
well, I've always been talking to myself, so it's not as if it's new, but
well, we'll come to that in a
I
minute.
quite enjoy I quite enjoy not having to go out and go through lunches and dinners and all those things, and it's I mean, I think I'm just getting very old, so I like this.
Anita, the interesting thing in all of this, while Ashok sort of jumps back on, is that you
Mhm.
began your world as an advertising person, and
Mhm.
and from there is when you made the shift to actual writing. Tell us a little bit about that period of time, advertising to writing.
Well, I was always writing, and the thing is, sometimes I think when I was about 25, I had to make this decision what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And at which point I decided that I was going to work in advertising because it so happened that I was good at it, and it paid well. So it gave me the freedom to be able to write exactly the way I wanted to without having to worry about if I was saleable or not saleable. And when I started writing, I didn't even think about if I was going to be published ever. And if not for certain circumstances where a fellow colleague pushed me on to meet somebody who was at that point an associate editor with the TOI in Bangalore, who then became a sort of mentor for me, who would tell me, have you thought of publishing a book? And then that was how my journey towards being an author began. So if that person hadn't told me that, have you considered publishing, I don't know what I would have been doing.
Wow, we've got Ashok back. Ashok, back to you.
Yes, yes. Thank you. I mean, I do apologize for this. It's obviously going to recur later on, so please accept my apologies beforehand. Anita, to get back to Eating Wasps, it's not just a collection of short stories. I would go so far as to say it's almost a collection of novels. They're so strong, these stories. I mean, it seems to me that you're an absolute born storyteller when I read these stories. Tell us a bit more about them. Tell us what drove you to write these stories, and how come they're so dark, and how is it that you're able to be so unflinching about them?
So, in 2001, I published this book called Ladies Coupé. And it was getting to a point where I thought, so I'd been writing it, say, in to 1999 onwards. And so when the book came out, and this was a book that kind of made a huge impact around the world. And to this day, I mean, people talk about me, they refer to my Ladies Coupé as the way to kind of introduce me to people who don't know me and say, oh, she's the author of Ladies Coupé. And so as time passed, I kept thinking that, are these stories dated? And do I need to go back and address the same issues that I did with that book, but making it more contemporary? And also, it was a kind of journey for me to understand how much has really changed between when I started writing Ladies Coupé to the time when I started writing Eating Wasps. Almost, 2 decades had gone past. And what had really changed in the way women perceived themselves and the way they looked at the world, and they looked at how they fitted into the world. So I began writing Eating Wasps with that intention. But at some point, of course, all these intentions go out of the window. And what happens then is the story and the storytelling takes supreme position. And so suddenly there were all these stories that I wanted to to bring forth, stories that I wanted to narrate. And it was trying to talk about choices people have to make and what drives their choices. And in the case of women, you see very often that the choices are about how well are they going to fit within societal norms, no matter how much has happened in life in the world, in terms of everything, in terms of women's rights, in terms of everything, technology, and so on. Fundamentally, I think women still have not been able to shred or shrug away this notion of having to fit into the society. And that was something that I wanted to address in this book. And so that was how Eating Wasps came into existence.
Anita, much of your writing, whether it was in Women's Coupe or in Eating Wasp, you really look at what it means. I mean, the decisions that women take and the consequences thereof. And that's fascinating in this 2-decade difference. Tell us a little bit about in Eating Wasp, especially how those consequences played out.
Well, in Eating Wasps, for instance, like when I wrote Ladies Coupé, for instance, there's not even a reference of a mobile phone in it. I mean, and today we can't imagine anybody without having a cell phone attached to them. And so how does technology make a difference? Even that, kind of has a huge impact on the way women make their decisions, in the way their decisions are swerved sometimes from what they want to do, because technology now is this kind of ankle monitoring device, or let's say like a wrist ear monitoring device, that is almost a way of keeping tabs on people, etc., and so on. So all of this has come into play. Also, the assumption is that in 20 years' time, that so much has changed. Women are much more clearer about what they want to do with their lives and how they want to lead their lives. But sadly, that is just on a very superficial level. Deep inside, I'm still not so sure that women have actually been, Indian women, so I have to be very specific about it, Indian women have still been able to shed this bulwark of societal acceptance.
Ashok, I'd asked her about this. So I want to pass it on to you, but leave it with the thought that, Anita, you were saying Indian women, but even in the sessions across the world that you've done for us, there's been a huge instant sort of recognition of the same kind of struggles that women face, whether it's in India or anywhere else. Ashok, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Anita, these stories, as you say, things have changed in those 20 years, but they haven't changed. The more it changes, the more it stays the same.
Absolutely.
Now, the one thing that struck me is how, I hesitate to use the word dark, because there's a lot of redemption there, but it's a chiaroscuro of dark and light. But it sounds as if it's very harrowing, and you've just kind of met them head on, unflinching. Was that difficult for you? Did it take a lot out of you?
Absolutely. I mean, I was like devastated after writing this book. And so much so, even while writing it, I felt physically ill, and nobody was able to really, like, I had one of the best doctors looking at me, and he just couldn't put his finger on what was wrong with me. And, I think so much of it is imagined. So all of it is taking the toll within me, rather than me being able to kind of go and ventilate it in some form. So everything that I have to write about, I have to imagine at first. And in this world of imagination that I live in, sometimes it's more real than my actual reality. So what happens is that it kind of makes me useless for human company. I have really no conversation. I have nothing much to say to anybody. I'm not interested in anything, because I'm going through everything that my characters are going through. And here there are all these stories, and so the effect multiplies day after day. Doesn't really kind of, at no point am I able to take a respite and say, okay, one of the stories is going to be, not so hard on me. But I couldn't do that. I had to make this decision to work at it like everything was going to, that was the one story that I was going to write. So I didn't really kind of distribute my energies over the book, but I went at it story by story. And so the result was that when the book was over, I just kind of felt like I had been squeezed dry. I don't know if you've seen how they make sugarcane juice. They put it into that thing, and every little thing, all you have is some dried out looking fiber. And that was how I felt.
Yeah, I can well imagine. I can well imagine. One of the things I particularly like about this book is this device of the ghost. I mean, it's a spectacular opening line. If we had more time, I'd ask you to read it. But you know, this young lady commits suicide, and it's her ghost, and you use that ghost as a device. It's like a little compartment that weaves in and out of all these stories. How did that come to you, that idea?
So, when in fact, I think Eating Wasps came because of this character, the ghost, Sri Lakshmi. So there was this writer in Kerala. Her name was, she was, some biographical details are similar to this character that she taught in a college, and that she had also won the Sahitya Academy. She's one of the first recipients of the Sahitya Academy, Kerala Sahitya Academy Award, and she did kill herself. And nobody knew why she killed herself. Nobody knew at all, because she was successful. She was single. She was successful. She had a thriving literary career, all of that. And then just one day she kills herself, and nobody knows why she killed herself. So I remember I was in Kerala at that time, and they were talking about her 50th death anniversary, etc. And there was some kind of hullabaloo around it and everything. And suddenly it occurred to me that what would Rajalakshmi, that was her name, what would Rajalakshmi write about if she were to come back to India now, 50 years from then? And suddenly from that thought, it was like, I didn't want this ghost wandering around in this, like we see in Indian films, in a white sari with her hair loose and all that stuff. That's a very gimmicky, filmy device. And I was like, what would really constitute Sri Lakshmi, the writer? And it was her index finger, because that was how she held her pen in a particular way. And the index finger was the one that guided the pen to move. And so that became a metaphor for a metaphor and a device to take the story forward.
It's beautifully planned. Now, because you weave in and out of these stories using this index finger. Was it quite, as a writer, was it very difficult to plan this? Did you juggle these stories around and figure out, I mean, was that a difficult part of it technically?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, the thing is, the structurally, I had this thing, okay, I had all these stories, but the challenge really was, how was I going to weave it all together so that it is seamless, at the same time it's also distinct. I couldn't have each character sounding like the other character, so I had to make sure that there was also suitable interjections to move the story forward, and to be able to define what was happening with each character. So it was a structural challenge, really. Which, Ashok, are you there?
I think Ashok has left. Ashok has given up his ghost, I suspect, and without finger. But Anita, one of the things that you do in Eating Wasps is you never ever portray the women as victims. You look at them in a very different light, but never as a victim. Tell us about that.
So a victim is someone who cannot control the circumstances that have led to her becoming a victim. I mean, that is my understanding of it. Whereas these women are not technically victims, but they are victims of their own decisions. They are victims of the consequences that come following those decisions. So I think to kind of relegate a woman character into this victimhood status is something that I abhor. The whole idea of it is very, very disgusting for me, because it's like, saying that, look at me, I'm this victim, look at me, look at what has happened to me, feel sorry for me. Rather, I would like to present them as women or as characters who have had to deal with a lot of things. Some of it is good and some of it is terrible. And for me, the most interesting part is, how do they emerge from it? How do they emerge? Obviously, they're not going to be unchanged. by what happens to them, but when they emerge from it, do they allow themselves to come out as stronger women, and what do they do about it? So that has always been my focus.
Ashok, back to you.
Okay. One of the things that strikes me, Anita, is how well and how easily you seem to inhabit your characters, and I don't mean just the women. I think the men as well. You manage to fix them very, very well. Of course, the men do come off rather badly. For the most part, they're mean-spirited, bitchy creatures. Is that how you see us, South Asian men?
Well, some men, not all men.
Oh, thank God. No, and you've also said somewhere else that all writers are ghosts. Do you see yourself as a sort of ghost flitting through? I mean, sort of inhabiting people, sucking their character out of them and moving on, because you do get those characters really well.
I don't see myself entirely as a ghoul. Sucking out the marrow of their bones and everything. But what I do see is I like this idea of possessing somebody for a brief while. So in that possession, I learn to, deconstruct that character. So later, when I actually try and recreate it, that experience of having slipped into the skin of a person I know partially or I know fully, or somebody I don't know at all, but is just a faceless entity in my mind, um, allows me to be able to become that character when I'm writing about that character.
Actually,
I don't know if I'm making sense, but that's how I function. I slip. Sometimes I become so, I identify so much with the character that I'm creating that I find myself changing the way I dress, the way I eat, the way I talk, etc. It's almost like method writing for me.
One of the things that strikes me as a South Asian man reading these stories is actually how much more complicated women's lives are than men's. Is that a valid comment? I mean,
absolutely. I think so because I see that on a daily basis, and I'm talking of when I'm interacting with women from different strata of society and different age groups, etc. I see that mostly, I'm not saying that men don't lead complex lives, but I think what the difference is that women's lives are more complicated. The difference is the complex and the complicated part of it, really.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk about your writing style for a moment. If I were to judge it or describe it from a personal trainer's point of view, it's very muscular, the prose. There's almost not an inch of fat or flab on it. There's extremely high definition. And that's what I love about it, because it's actually very, it's almost too easy to read. Have you ever been tempted to flesh this prose out more? Or is this your style? Because I love it, actually.
No. The thing is, it's very easy to want to be to be able to kind of go on and on and on. Like all those lyrical flourishes and everything. But I think paring it down to just the muscle is what is exciting for me as a writer, because I think my focus is on telling a story and bringing alive the characters rather than dwelling too much on how the story is told. So that's a decision I had to make at some point in my artistic career, that am I going to be somebody who's going to write very beautiful prose? Yes, I do. What I do is once in a while, because I know I can do it, I kind of bung it in some way just so that I feel good about it. But in all honesty, I think that my focus, and I do believe that, is that I'm a storyteller, and that is exactly what I want to do, and not couch it in words.
Yes, in fact, it brings me back to my first comment that a lesser writer or a different writer would have taken each of those short stories, and there's enough material there, enough storyline there to turn it into a novel. Whereas you have, with one flourish, you've thrown 10 different novels at us, because each of those stories is very, very strong and a standalone story. So, I mean, admiration, my full admiration as a fellow writer for being able to do that. Another particular delight of this book is this kind of pan-religionist aspect. There are different characters of different religions. There's Najma, who's Muslim. There's, do I call him Father Marcos, the Reverend Marcos, or whatever? That there are many different. Is this a speciality of Kerala, would you say? I mean, do you have, or is this all India? Forgive me.
All of India. We have so many, we have all the religions in the world in India. And but it was also that it wasn't like I set out to say that I would say create one Muslim character, two Christian characters, and that sort of a thing. It wasn't that. It just so happened that for me, when a story happens in my head, it comes out almost like fully formed. So the character appears in my mind, and the character appears with religious definition, landscape, wherever that was, state of origin, all of those things. So I wanted to use these different characters also in a way to be able to create some form of distinction between the stories. Otherwise, it was just going to be like one story divided into 10 parts.
Do you play badminton? This sounds like a strange question, but I love the badminton story, and you got very technical at times. So you must. Do you play it?
I do play, and also there is a national champion who is a neighbor or was a neighbor, and I would call him and ask him the most inane questions, and he was very, very kind to answer them. And so I do play badminton.
Yes, and it's a very lovely story, and the badminton parts of it were very, very exciting. I mean, perhaps that's I don't know. For me, that was very very exciting. Of course, there is one great disappointment in this book for me, and that is the fact that there are hardly any houses in it. Because I know I have to explain to the audience here that Anita and I are probably the only writers we know who are also builders. So I'm very sorry that there wasn't enough building in it. But do we expect a building story or something in your next book?
Oh yes, in fact, that I do this crime series, and
yes.
I'm working on the new one now. And it's all about real estate and houses and buildings and, all those things. So there's a lot of house plus building plus structural definitions there and everything.
Gosh, good. And have you been managing in COVID to keep your own roofs waterproof? Because I think the last time we met, we were talking about leaking roofs, both in Colombo and in Bangalore. I remember.
Oh yes, so yes, the Kerala house was fixed last year, and and last year it didn't leak. This year it hasn't leaked. I'm told. I haven't been able to go to Kerala for the last 4 months now. So I just think it's like, God having a whatever superpower, having a laugh and saying, okay, now she's fixed her roof. I'm not going to let her go there.
We're running out of time because they'll soon be asking questions. But one other quick question. Sorry. Did you want to say something?
Yeah. Before that, I did want to ask you about this new book of yours that's coming out in March next year. You said. Do tell me the title. The title sounded really interesting. The Unmarriageable Man?
Yes.
Okay. In contrast to the Suitable Boy.
Well, yeah, it sounds. He's the most unsuitable boy here. Anyway, it's kind of a strange story. It's half memoir, half fiction, and it deals ostensibly about the life of an Asian builder in London, which actually I was in the 1980s. It was kind of a very strange time. I think we've talked about it before, but I won't spoil it. It was a weird time, and there were no other Asian builders in London. At least I like to think there may have been some in the woodwork, but there certainly weren't in South London. So it's ostensibly about that, but actually underneath it's the serious part, the dark part. It's about grief. I lost my mother while I was writing it, but in fact the book was planned long before, and it's about how I dealt with the death of my father, which happened quite a long while back. But it's one of these things where what you write comes true. It's kind of ominous and rather awful. And when I was 3/4 of the way through it, my mother actually passed away. And so although I was reliving scenes from 20 years before, it was almost like it was happening day by day. Anyway, that sounds terribly heavy, etc. I assure you it's not a heavy book. But anyway, that's
No, I love the ceaseless chatter of demons, and I'm waiting to read this.
Oh, good. So now tell us, what next? You got the inspector. How do you pronounce that? Is it Gouda,
like the cheese.
Gouda, as like the
Not
cheese.
like Gouda, but Gouda.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
And yeah, so I'm working on that. And then I've started doing these audio stories for Storytel, and I'm loving that because it allows me to write in a very different way. And that the writing is very immediate. There's no real time to, dwell on character. Dwell on the setting and everything. In the first 1 minute, you need to be able to grab the listener, or they're just going to switch off and go away. So I've been having fun doing that. I've had 2 stories out already on that, and I'm working on a 3rd story now for them. And I'm constantly working, and I'm working on multiple things at the same time. So a lot of work.
One thing that strikes me is that you've been writing for a relatively long time, and there are the Inspector Gouda stories, for instance, and then some of the characters in Eating Wasps figured in Mistress, your book, Mistress, they come back. Now, do these characters remain in your mind? Do you visit them even when you're not writing about them? Do you sometimes wonder what they're doing? Are they alive in your head?
No, not like Gouda. Gouda is alive in my head because he's just part of a series. But with the others, it's like, when you think of someone you've met in another city, and you don't know if you'll go back and see them again, but once in a while you think about them. But it's not like you think about them every day. So that's the way these characters are. But one of the things that has happened is that because, these books are appearing in various editions at various times, even if I want to forget them, I can't, because I'm suddenly having to answer a question by a translator, or maybe there's a interview that I need to answer a question about another character, or sometimes, it's just as basic as somebody is bringing out a paperback edition and I need to revisit the book to make sure that, there are no problems with it and things like that. So it's in a way, it's like I can't let them go, even if I want to.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Of course, you are very well known in Italy. I remember once you told me that you actually recognized on the streets there and so on. So I guess these other editions come out and then you've got. But are you ever nervous that you've actually forgotten what you've written? You have to
yes, at times. Yeah. When sometimes, and I know it's some kind of a book event, there would be somebody who would be quoting from one of my books, and I think, oh, that sounds very familiar. Who said that? And then it would occur to me later, of course, when that person finishes, what they're saying, that this was in this book of yours. And I'm like, oh, yes. So did I actually write that?
Okay, so we've got a question for you here from Shistri. Smita asks, ambiguous ending in Half a Sin in Eating Wasps. Was it intended? I did not read the Kerala Kamudi version Malayalam, but was it the same? Does that make sense?
Yes, it was the same, and the ending is the same. It hasn't changed. In fact, Hafizen was also part of a play that I had written, and so what happened, or what I'd like to do with the way I write these stories, is that like the reader to finish it in their head. I mean, I'd like to give them the opportunity to actually to be able to figure it out themselves, because most of these stories have a sort of open ending, in the sense that depending on the kind of person the reader is, I want them to finish the story. Now, if you're a very pessimistic person, you would finish a certain way. And if you're one of those very happy, optimistic people, you'd finish it another way. So that is something that I want the reader to do, rather than me telling them how the story is going to end.
And that's probably what makes it so successful. We've got another question here from Sachdev Ramakrishna, who says, Ms. Nair, are there particular places where you find the inspirations for your writing? Idris, for example, seems to connect two different worlds, whilst the others are set in Malabar, your backyard.
So I like to write about places I'm familiar with, the customs of that place and everything about that place, because that to me is what helps me detail out, the character's mindset, etc. So I would be able to write about a place that I'm not entirely familiar with. So which is why most of my writing, all of my writing has always been located in southern India, which is what I know very well. My first book was a collection of short stories, which was some of it was set in Manhattan, because I'd spent some time there doing pretty much nothing except like walking the entire grid of Manhattan. And so when I came back, even the stories that I wrote were only short stories. I didn't think I knew enough to write a novel set in Manhattan. So for me, it's very important that I know what I'm writing about. Everything, every little detail I need to know before I can start writing.
Okay, there's another question. Ritika asks, since you have experimented with a lot of different genres and forms, personally, which genre do you like operating in most? Interesting question.
The literary novel, of course, the literary novel or the literary short story, because the challenge there is that you have to, the pace is something that is not like writing a crime thriller, for instance, where the pace is going to carry the book forward. But here it is the story and the character who have to, push the story forward.
Yeah. Okay, loads more questions coming up. Arun G asks, do you decide from your ideas whether it's going to be a full-length book or a story?
Yes, I know that. Before I start writing, the idea stays in my head for a long time. And as it kind of germinates and acquires, dimensions to it, I know how much I can stretch the story. Is this going to be something that is right for a short story, or is it something that is going to have the skeleton to be able to develop into a full-fledged novel?
Yeah. Okay. From Indu Ravindran asks, when can we expect Idris 2? There you are. That's the repeat of another character.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Hopefully in a couple of years, hopefully. That's if we are all alive.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Okay, one more here. Smita asks, isn't Mega a victim of an external perpetrator? What is your comment on this? Isn't Mega?
She is the victim of an external of a molester. And the thing is, this child is so starved for love and affection that she gravitates towards this man because he just makes her feel special, which she doesn't get at home. At home, she's always seen as somebody who is a little nuisance. And so when this molester grooms her pretty much by making her feel special, she just gravitates towards him. So I would think the circumstances of her home are as much to blame as the molester, who thought here is a victim that I can prey on.
I must say that's one story that I found very difficult to read. It's just,
Yeah.
it had you on edge all the time.
Yeah, it kind of devastated me writing it.
Yeah, gosh, yeah. Any other questions? Is there anybody who wants to ask any more questions? The floor is yours, because we have to wrap up in a minute or two. Anything else that you'd like to add, Anita, to what you have said about your writing?
No, it's just that I just think that, that writing was and is always the most important thing that I've done and will do.
Of your many disciplines. Writing.
Yeah, well, it's the thing that it's one thing that I don't need to depend on anybody else for,
True, it's
so that way it's pretty much self-sufficient and to that extent till of course it goes to the publisher, and then it needs an agent, and it needs an editor and all those things. But while I'm writing it, I'm playing God, and it is a rather addictive feeling.
Yeah, and it's totally your responsibility, your baby. Yeah. One other question here. Rohan asks, how has writing in lockdown been? Have you been working on something? Well, we've kind of answered that.
Yes. I mean, I've been working diligently, because otherwise I'd probably be climbing walls. So I've been writing every day diligently, but I again treat it like, I mean, I'm useless after about 12 in the afternoon. So I'm an early morning person, so I work in the mornings, and so I work every morning pretty much, except Sundays when I decided that I wouldn't. I needed a day off.
Okay, one last question. Shweta asks, when you're writing the novel, what goes into the process of naming a novel? Because you've got to admit that last title was a brilliant one, Eating Wasps. What goes into
it? Well, I think most times the title suggests itself. And with Eating Wasps, Kartika, my publisher, also contributed, because I had a slightly more longish title, as in using eating and wasps and everything. And then she said, like, let's try and make it more succinct. And so that's how it became Eating Wasps. So I think the titles very often suggest themselves, even as I'm writing it.
Okay. Any other questions from anyone? I can't see anything more here. So we look forward to Inspector Gowda coming out. When is it due to be released? When is it due to be released?
Well, I'm still writing it.
Okay.
So hopefully sometime next year, early next year, hopefully. If the thing is, as I write, I get more and more interested in what, in the research part of it. And then I get a little bogged down by all that, and I lose time. So, I'm still writing it, and until I know I've reached the last, like say 10,000 words, I really don't know when it's going to finish.
Yeah, and is writing a detective story much more technical? Do you worry about the corpse and how you dispose of it, or who disposed of it, or
no, everything. The detailing for me is very, very important, because the whole thing is like, even if nobody else knows and they can't catch out the little boo-boos that I make, I would still know, and I would know that, I took a shortcut and I compromised and everything. See, yeah. Which is why I hope I'll be a good builder.
Oh, you are absolutely. I can tell you that. Ladies and gentlemen, Anita Nair. Thank you so much, Anita, for being with us today. And I think we now hand over to Sanjoy Roy.
Thank you, Ashok. It was lovely, as
Oh,
always.
great, great. As
Thank
always.
you
Thank
so much, Ashok. That was fabulous for this 2.5-way conversation that we did.
Yes, I'm so sorry about that.
Thank you,
It's
Anita, for
been
bearing
letting
up
it down.
with this fabulous thing. But in fact, you were saying you love playing God when you're writing. Well, you could consider politics as well. They sort of-
No, because
No.
I like playing God with characters whose lives I can determine. Politicians end up becoming victims of their own greed. So,
and the other place where fact is stranger than fiction is really the whole encounter stories that we're reading in the papers, and that I think is
Yes,
really
yes.
yeah.
Some of the best fiction is in newspapers.
at some point. But I had a question: were you at all sort of inspired by Francis Xavier in Goa, where the lady bit off the toe of the saint and sort of decided to take it home? And that, and for me, the minute when I was reading the book, I was like, "Hey, this is Goa. This is the cathedral of the church."
No. I didn't even know about it. So the thing for me is, why the finger was, I was talking to my brother, he's a doctor, and I was talking to him and I said, Sunil, what does, a finger that's been like kind of buried for about 50 years looks like? I mean, what does it look like? And he said, well, if you want a very common example, it looks like a piece of chalk. And that for me just worked because this is a writer, chalk, and all of those things. It's all those different elements, and suddenly it falls together and it makes perfect sense, at least to me. It makes perfect sense. And then I just start writing from that.
That was fabulous. Thank you so much, Anita. Thank you, Ashok. Stay safe. And thank you all for watching and being such a great audience as usual. Thank our official radio partners, Red FM. Please do remember to log in on Friday, the 24th of July, for another set of great sessions. We start with A Secret History of Compassion, Paul Zakaria, in conversation with Annapurna Raju. Iconic Malayalam writer Paul Zakaria presents his first English novel, A Secret History of Compassion. Zakaria's body of literary work includes short stories, novellas, travelogues, screenplays, essays, columns, and of course, children's books. His latest novel examines his relationship with the left and the vocabulary of social justice. And this will be at 7 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 2:30 p.m. British Summer Time, and 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The second session on Friday, the 24th of July, is Ian McEwan, Machines Like Me, in conversation with Marcus du Sautoy. And this is an exploration of the prolific life and creative journey of Ian McEwan, featured by the Times on their list of the 50 greatest British writers since 1945. A 6-time Man Booker nominee, McEwan won the 1998 prize for Amsterdam. The session discusses his most recent novel, Machines Like Me, and the political messages, macabre portrayals, and alternate timelines and themes of artificiality within. This will be at 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 4 p.m. British Summer Time, and 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Stay safe. See you soon on Friday.